Hey, welcome back. I'm excited to share this new series on JavaScript with you. This series continues where we left off with the previous series that you can find on TechCast. So here's the content of the previous series. It's JavaScript for beginners, and it's really the foundations. It's the language itself. So if you're unfamiliar with JavaScript at all, this is probably where you want to start. In this course, we talk about everything from variables and operators to if loops and while loops. We talk about how to create functions and looping through arrays and variables. And so this course goes pretty deep into the language itself. So I won't rehash this content in this video series, but now that you have this as your foundation, we're ready to jump into JavaScript in the browser. So all of the code that we're going to write in this video series is shared publicly in this GitHub repo. It's under my personal repo, rcravens, JavaScript in the browser, and you're going to find a directory with code, and you'll see all the code for all the different videos here. In addition, the README page contains everything that we're going to talk about, the different modules with all the different videos, and has quick links to all the code. So as far as content goes, this code really is the skeleton. The meat that goes on that skeleton is really going to be contained inside the videos. So be sure to watch the videos to get a thorough understanding of the topics. At the end of this video series, you should feel pretty comfortable about writing vanilla JavaScript without any frameworks or libraries and accomplishing what you want to accomplish in the web. So really taking your HTML and your CSS and adding that interactivity that JavaScript can provide. Before getting to this video's content, just a quick note about my setup. I'm using JetBrains' WebStorm as my IDE. You can use whatever you want. Visual Studio Code will work just fine. And I'm going to be using Chrome as my browser of choice. All the code that we're going to develop in this series should work in any browser that you want to choose, as long as that browser is compliant with the standards. So here you can see that I've cloned that repo. I'm looking at the README file right now. I just want to quickly review what's all in the code directory. At the very top, I have a template, and this is an index.html and the index.javascript. And the JavaScript is empty, and the HTML page will provide the elements that we're going to use to interact with using our JavaScript. Some pages will have some additional content. This particular page is just the template itself. And in the template, none of this is functional. So if I type in I want to look for Amazon, none of this is going to function here. As we go along in this video series, we're going to learn how to make this template function. But let's close up the template, and the next directory is the finished project. This is where we're heading towards. This is our end goal. I'm not going to show this right now. I don't want to ruin any surprises. But as we go along, we're going to learn how to develop everything that you'll see in this finished project. And then there's a directory for every single video. So we're going to get to video number 1. You can either access it directly, open it up and you can get access to the code, or you can use the README file and click code, and it'll take you to the html.index page. From there, you can shift and click on the index.js, and now you'll have the code. So this is the code for video number 1. So in WebStorm, I can hit my play button, and that'll show up in my browser. There is some JavaScript content that is already here, but what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to take all the content that we're going to develop in this video and I'm going to delete it, and we're going to refresh this page. So this was typically how I'm going to start every single video. I'll load the index.html, I'll load the index.js, and then we have a list of bullet points that we're going to discuss during the video, and we'll develop code as we discuss those bullet points. So I've already talked about the JavaScript foundations, and there's a link to that video series over at TechCast. What I do want to point out here is where we're at in this progression. We talked about the JavaScript foundations, and this JavaScript foundations course really covers the keywords and the code, how to write JavaScript. Now, when you write JavaScript code, it has to run somewhere, and that is going to be the runtime environment. So what we're going to talk about in this course is the runtime environment is going to be the browser. So we're going to talk about JavaScript in the browser. In a future course, I'm going to be talking about JavaScript on a server. So for example, Node, we're going to be running Node. So if I scroll down just a little bit, you can see the host environment. In our case, this is going to be a browser. And in particular, we're using Chrome here. We have our JavaScript code that is going to be on that browser somewhere. We're going to load that in to our web page. And then we have this box called the JavaScript runtime. So this is not something that we provide. This is what the browser provides to us. So as part of that runtime, there's a JavaScript engine that takes and parses our code and just-in-time compiles it and executes it. And we're going to learn more details about that in just a second. But in addition, this JavaScript runtime, the browser provides a bunch of browser APIs, which will allow us to interact with the DOM or the elements on the HTML page. It also provides us access to a lot of different things that are part of that environment. And we'll see as we go along, you can access the camera or local storage or the clipboard. And then there's also something called the event loop. JavaScript, you may have heard, is single-threaded. So the event loop really helps manage the call stack and what's going to get executed next by the JavaScript engine. And then the browser also does some other things for us, like memory management. We don't have to worry about that. There is a link here to JavaScript engines for major browsers, and I encourage you to go ahead and take a look at this. And this is an article written by John, sorry if I butcher this, but Dakshak. What I found interesting is he kind of broke down major browsers. I got Chrome, Edge, Mozilla, Safari, and what are the engines that are being run by every single browser. But if you were to go back, say, 10 or 15 years, the browsers were kind of the wild, wild west. Everybody had their own flavor. And so when it's important, we will talk about the history, where we came from, so that you can understand why things are the way they are. And finally, at the bottom of the page, understanding the page lifecycle is important, at least at a high level. You don't need to understand all the details of how everything gets parsed and all of that, but it's important to know that when you navigate to a page, there's this life cycle that is happening. And there's more details here. If you follow this link, you can see, for example, during the navigation phase of that life cycle, it's taken, for example, your URL that you type in, and it's converting it to an IP address. And so that's part of the DNS lookup. And then once it has an IP address, it starts the connections. And the browsers speak a protocol, HTTP or HTTPS, which is based upon TCP socket. So you can see that there's this TCP handshake and there's TLS negotiation for HTTPS. And at some point, we get a response. And that initial response is our HTML page. But you can see our HTML page has source scripts, which will need to be loaded also. There is this whole process about parsing the HTML, building the DOM tree, preloading other assets. And then finally you get to the part where the browser renders those elements to you so you can start to see it. And that includes styling the elements and laying them out and painting them on the screen. And as you probably know, in HTML, everything is really a box. And then your styles really determine, do I have rounded corners? Is this box red? Is the font in this box, is it large? Is it bold? And so you can style every single box. And when the browser paints these boxes, it has to understand, what's the lower layer, what's the top layer, so that it paints things in the right order. And then finally, we get down to the interactivity phase. This is where our JavaScript is going to kick in and allow us to interact with the DOM or the HTML elements. All right, so let's come back to our notes. I believe we talked about this one. We talked about the JavaScript code engine and runtime relationships. We talked about the JavaScript engine for major browsers. What is the DOM and the tree? We kind of highlighted that when we talked about parsing. So before we dive into the DOM, let's just take a look. I'm going to right-click this and view page source. And what that's going to do is that's going to show you the raw HTML. And you can also see that here in our IDE. This HTML is exactly the same as this HTML. It's not really parsed yet when you look at it this way. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's really like an XML-based language. So you have these tags like head, div, and h1, where you can create a node by having an opening tag and a closing tag, and in between you can add child nodes. So you can build up this structure of elements that have these child and parent relationships. And so, for example, you can see that this div has an h1 as a child. It also has a div as a child, which has the form as a child, which has an input as a child. And so there's really this tree structure as we start to look at this visually. Now, if I come back to my page and I right click and I inspect, I'm going to pull up the development tools for Chrome. And over on the left side, this is exactly what we were talking about. This is the HTML, but it's been parsed and we can see the tree. So if I collapse everything down, here is the head node and it has these different elements. Here is our body, and this was the div that we just looked at. This div had an H1, it had another div which had a form, which had an input and a button. So each of these elements we also see that has additional attributes. So class is an attribute and it has some value associated with it. I do want to spend a moment just talking about classes and in general CSS and styles. So when you select a particular element, you're going to see all the different styles that are associated with it over here. Within HTML, you can really define what is shown, and then the styles allow you to change how it's shown. There's a padding on this one, or the background is a gray color. So in this course, we're not going to dive any more into what HTML and CSS looks like. We're going to use them, but we're going to spend most of our time talking about JavaScript. So here is our DOM. We have the console window. Our console has these three statements up here. So if I refresh this, you'll see those again. So I can interact in the console. Let me log in, just some message, and you can see it does what I want it to do. Now I don't want to interact here because whatever I type here, whenever I refresh it, it's just going to disappear. So what we're going to do is, like we did in the last course, is we'll type stuff over here. So I can do that same thing, and now you can see it's logged, but if I refresh, it'll be there persistently. Okay, so let's take a look at this document object model. And what I want to do is I'm going to console log a variable that's called document. And this variable is provided to us by the browser, and you can see it right here. But what I'm going to do is just log it out so we can take a look at more of it. And so this document variable is really the parsed HTML. It's the DOM. And you can see it as we expand it. So if I expand it, you can see the HTML, you can see the head, the body. And as I dive into this, you can watch at the very top also how the browser knows that we're hovering over an element and it'll highlight it in the very top. So if I want to find, for example, this button, there's a couple of ways that I can do it. I can either navigate to it through the DOM, find it this way, or I can also use this little widget right here and I can select an element. I can go over here, highlight it, click it, and then it'll find it for me. Just a couple of quick ways to kind of navigate the DOM here. So the DOM is more than just this tree that we see here. It's really an API that allows us to interact with that tree. And we're going to get into more details about that throughout this course. I'm just going to make a note here that that's the DOM. We're going to refresh here. We can see both DOM and our document. So as a preview, I'm going to show you a few things that we can do with the DOM. In later videos, we're going to dive into all the details of exactly what all these mean. So for now, just kind of sit back and enjoy the show. For example, I have all of these images that are here. So if I want to look at what this is, I can inspect it. It'll show me that it's an image. And if I want, I can find every single image in this document. So I can query, select all of the elements, and here's where I put my selector string. Now this string is going to allow me to kind of filter down what I want to see. And I want all of the images. If I console log out, images, and let's refresh, now you can see I have a node list back that has 3 images. And if I highlight, here's the first image at the very top, here's the second image here, and here's the third image, which is down here at the very bottom. There's a third image. And if you expand, for example, one of the images, you can see all the attributes that are associated with that image. And I can start to interact with them. As an example, let's take our first image, which is right here, and let's look at the attributes on it. So I'm going to console log out images. It's an array. So I'm going to index it by index 0. That's the first one. And let's look at the styles that are on that first image. And you can see I have a CSS here. This is all the different styles that are part of that top image there. And not only can I list them and see them, I can change them. For example, that first image, I might want to put a border around that. Let's just really make it ugly so that we can see it. So it's a 10 pixel wide solid red border. Now I need my equal sign right there. And if I refresh this, now I can get that border. So the browser runtime environment really provides us a lot of events that happen as we interact with the environment. So as I move my mouse, I get mouse over events. As I click things, I get click events. So this allows us to interact with those events. So let's go and try a few. Let's take that second image, which is here. I scrolled up, you can see it there. And we are going to add an event listener. This is how you listen for events. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a mouse enter event. And for now, let's just go ahead and log This is our mouse enter. And then if I refresh, and you can see every time the mouse enters that image, it goes over the image, we're going to console log out mouse enter. I can get multiples of these as I go back and forth. Well, there's also a corresponding event called mouse leave. So now that I have both these wired up, if I refresh this, as I enter, I get a message, and as I leave, I get a message. Enter, leave, enter, leave, enter, leave. And so now once you have your events wired up, you can interact with this. Let's go ahead and do this. We're just going to add that ugly border to it. So image number 2 there. And then as you leave, maybe we clear out that border. We'll just set it to be none here. So if I refresh now, we'll still get our console logs as I go in and out, but now I get the ugly border, it's gone. Ugly border, it's gone. Ugly border is gone. Now you probably wouldn't do this on your web page. I mean, that's kind of ugly, but the idea is these events are occurring. You can subscribe to these events with listeners, and then you can create some interactivity that you will have on your page. All right, so that's really the document object model at a high level. I want to talk about this browser object model here. So let's go ahead and just make a separate little area. And for this, if you want, you can go to W3 Schools and you can learn about the browser object model. In this course, we're going to cover almost all of these. So we're going to cover the navigator, we're going to cover location, history, timing, cookies, all of that. This is all provided to you by the browser environment. So let's close that down. Let's come back to our page here. Let's do this. Down here, I'm going to console log the window. If I hover over this, this is really the higher level abstraction. This actually contains the DOM, the document, but it also provides access to all of those other features that we just saw. So let's go ahead and refresh the page here. So here's this window, and you can see if I scroll down a little bit, here's the document. This is the document that we're just dealing with. But then there's all of these other things too. For example, we've been doing this console log. Where's this console? Well, that happens to be part of the BOM, the browser object model. And that's really what we've been using. And let's just go ahead and clarify this. This is the BOM. And if I refresh this page, you still get this is part of the BOM. This is the window. And generally, you don't need to dereference it with window dot. You can just access these things directly. As another example, you can put an alert box. There's an alert. And if I refresh, I'll get this alert box that's up here. And I'll have to dismiss this before the rest of the page goes. And again, I don't need to dereference it. Most of the time, we will just write things like this. Access alert directly. So I got the first message, I get the second message. Now where you may want to dereference it is if, for example, you're going to have your own custom alert. Maybe what you want to do is you want to write your own alert that takes the message, but you're going to prefix it with something. So then you can call the alert that's in the BOM with your prefix plus your message like that. Okay, so now if I refresh this, I get this is a message. That's our first call. And on this call, I use window.alert. So I called the BOM directly and I got that message. The second one, I'm not really calling window.alert. I'm actually calling our function here, which eventually calls window.alert, but it prefixes whatever the message is. So when I dismiss this first one, we're going to see prefix colon and then our message. And then finally, I just want to tease a little bit of the stuff that we're going to talk about in the future here. So for example, there's local storage. If I refresh, after our messages here, it's going down, you can see this storage variable. And this storage already has a few things in it from future videos that are kind of hanging around. But we'll talk about how to actually store data in local storage and how to delete data or remove it from local storage. And the BOM provides other features. For example, there's a navigator that provides geolocation. I can get GPS coordinates. And if you're on a mobile device, it will actually use the GPS as part of your cell phone. If you're on a desktop, there's other ways that it determines what your location is. And a lot of times those are actually pretty accurate. And so you can get GPS locations. You can interact with media devices. So any cameras or microphones that are hooked up, we'll talk about that in future videos. You can interact with other websites by using the fetch command, which is part of the window or the BOM. And that fetch command will allow you to load resources from other websites. So that's it for this video. It's a bit longer than I wanted. Most videos in this series won't be this long, but I really wanted to take the opportunity to dive into, at a high level, what the document object model is and what the browser object model is, and tying them to what the JavaScript runtime environment looks like. In the next video, we're going to start using our DOM, our document object model, and the API associated with it to select elements and interact with them. So we'll see you next time.